There has always been a tension between faith and reason, a quiet, invisible conflict that lives within every thinking soul. On one side stands the yearning to believe, to find something larger than oneself, to surrender to mystery and meaning. On the other stands the demand to understand, to test, to question, to know. Throughout history, many have tried to silence this conflict by choosing one side over the other. Some rejected reason to preserve belief. Others rejected belief to preserve reason. Maimonides, however, refused this false choice. For him, truth was one, and both faith and reason were paths leading toward it. In the modern world, this tension has become sharper. Science reveals wonders once considered divine, while religion in many places has hardened into dogma. The individual stands between two walls, one cold with skepticism, the other burning with blind zeal. We are told to choose, either accept without question or doubt without end. Yet both extremes leave the heart restless. Blind faith can justify cruelty. Unbounded reason can empty life of meaning. The question then is not whether to believe, but how to believe wisely. Maimonides lived in a world not unlike ours, a crossroads of cultures, faiths, and philosophies. Born in Córdoba, Spain, in 1138, he grew up during the golden age of Islamic scholarship, where Jewish, Muslim, and Christian thinkers debated the nature of God and the universe. When persecution forced his family into exile, he carried with him not only the Torah, but also the works of Aristotle, Plato, and the physicians of Alexandria. To him, philosophy and faith were not enemies, but allies in the pursuit of truth. He once wrote, "Accept the truth from whoever says it," reminding his readers that divine wisdom is not confined to any one book or creed. In the Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides addressed a generation caught between revelation and reason. Those who feared that philosophy might destroy faith or that religion might forbid knowledge. His message was clear. If one's faith collapses under the weight of reason, it was never faith in truth, but faith in illusion. True faith, he argued, cannot fear inquiry, because what is true cannot contradict reason, and what contradicts reason cannot come from God. To believe blindly, for Maimonides, was to risk worshipping an image of one's own ignorance rather than the reality of the divine. He saw the danger of faith without understanding in the way people misused religion, turning it into a tool for power, superstition, or emotional escape. For him, faith detached from reason was not holiness, it was idolatry of the mind. When people imagine God as a body or a willful force that loves and hates like humans, they reduce the infinite to something finite, an image shaped by fear and desire. Maimonides warned that this misunderstanding is not harmless. It distorts both morality and worship. A faith that fears reason becomes violent in its defense. A mind that refuses to think becomes vulnerable to manipulation. And yet he also saw the other extreme, the arrogance of pure rationalism, which dismisses faith as primitive. A life governed only by intellect, he argued, becomes dry and sterile. Reason without awe leads to pride, and pride blinds the mind as surely as ignorance blinds the heart. The wise path, therefore, is not to abandon faith, but to refine it, to transform belief from emotional impulse into enlightened conviction. This is what Maimonides called knowledge of God, not believing that God exists, but understanding how he must exist if truth and logic are real. In today's world, we face the same challenge, only amplified. We see faith exploited for political gain and reason misused to justify nihilism. One side shouts that belief is all we need, the other insists that belief is the problem. But between those extremes lies the way of Maimonides, a middle path of intellectual humility and spiritual courage. It is the path of those who seek God not through fear, but through wisdom, who dare to question, not because they wish to destroy belief, but because they long to make it real. Believing wisely means embracing uncertainty without surrendering to it. It means allowing doubt to refine, not erode one's conviction. Maimonides teaches that reason is not the enemy of faith, but its discipline. the tool that sharpens it. Just as the body must be trained to act rightly, the mind must be trained to believe rightly. The unexamined belief, he might say, is as dangerous as the unexamined desire. Both can lead a person astray. In this light, faith and reason are not opposites, but complementary organs of perception. Reason is the eye that sees the structure of truth. Faith is the heart that feels its presence. One without the other is half blind. To believe without reason is to walk in darkness. To reason without faith is to stare at light and feel nothing. The harmony of the two, that is where Maimonides placed the essence of wisdom. And so, the question returns to us. In a time of noise and confusion, when opinion often replaces knowledge and belief becomes a badge of identity rather than a path to understanding, can we still practice the art of believing wisely? Maimonides would say yes, but only if we are willing to think deeply, love truth more than comfort, and walk the narrow bridge between knowing and trusting. To understand Maimonides' view of faith and reason, one must first see how he conceived the nature of God and the purpose of human intellect. For him, the human mind was not merely a tool for survival or creativity. It was the divine spark within man, the faculty through which we approach the Creator. The act of thinking, when guided by truth and humility, is a form of worship. Thus, to reason about God is not to diminish him, but to honor him. Ignorance, not inquiry, is the real threat to faith. In the Guide for the Perplexed, Maimonides speaks to those who love both the Torah and philosophy, the perplexed who fear that rational thought might tear apart their beliefs. He begins by distinguishing between literal belief and intelligent belief. Literal belief clings to words, metaphors, and appearances. Intelligent belief seeks the meaning beneath them. When Scripture says that God has a hand or becomes angry, Maimonides insists these are metaphors, human language trying to express realities beyond comprehension. To take them literally, he warns, is to fall into idolatry. The divine has no body, no emotion, no change. God is pure existence, the necessary being upon which all contingent beings depend. This radical conception redefines faith itself. Faith, for Maimonides, is not passive acceptance, but active understanding. It is not the suspension of reason, but its fulfillment. When we comprehend that God cannot be seen, touched, or defined in human terms, we approach a purer form of belief, one that is humble before the mystery, yet loyal to truth. In this sense, Maimonides' faith is deeply rational, but his reason is deeply reverent. He never sought to reduce God to logic. Rather, he used logic to purify our vision of God. For Maimonides, ignorance about God breeds two dangers: superstition and fanaticism. The superstitious mind turns God into a magician who interferes capriciously with the world, rewarding and punishing according to emotion. The fanatical mind goes further, believing that its crude image of God must be defended through force. Both, he argued, arise from the same root, belief without knowledge. When men believe without thinking, they mistake imagination for revelation. And when imagination rules the soul, religion becomes an instrument of control, not liberation. He sought to cure this illness, not by destroying faith, but by educating it. His method was philosophical medicine, healing the soul through understanding. Just as a physician diagnoses the body, Maimonides diagnosed the errors of belief. He would not allow faith to become a disease of the intellect. It is better, he said, to believe nothing about God than to believe something false. That statement alone shows his courage. He preferred honest doubt over comfortable illusion. He did not demand that everyone become a philosopher, but he insisted that every believer must avoid foolishness. For ignorance in matters of God is not innocence, it is corruption of the mind. Maimonides saw no contradiction between revelation and reason. Both, he believed, come from the same source, the Creator. Therefore, they cannot truly conflict. If reason proves something to be true, it cannot contradict faith rightly understood, and if revelation seems to oppose reason, it must be interpreted symbolically, not literally. This was not a compromise, but a principle of unity. Truth is one. The apparent conflict arises only from our limited grasp of language and reality. As he wrote, the contradiction is in us, not in the truth itself. This harmony between reason and faith forms the foundation of Maimonides' entire system. It is why he devoted equal passion to theology and science, law and medicine. For him, studying the natural world was another way of studying the divine will. Each discovery was an act of praise, each observation a form of prayer. The more you know of the works of God, he wrote, the more you will come to love him. To understand creation rationally is to love the Creator more fully. Ignorance breeds fear, understanding breeds awe. Maimonides also warned against an excess of rational pride, the belief that human intellect alone can grasp the whole of reality. Reason has limits. It cannot penetrate the essence of God. But those limits are not barriers to faith. They are its foundation. To know that one does not know is the beginning of wisdom. In this humility, Maimonides saw the perfection of intellect. The wise man uses reason to reach the edge of mystery and then bows before it. That is not surrender, but alignment. Faith begins where arrogance ends. He viewed faith and reason as two stages of the same ascent. The first lifts the mind from ignorance to understanding. The second lifts the soul from understanding to devotion. One who stops at reason alone is like a traveler who reaches the mountain's base but never climbs. But one who rejects reason and leaps blindly into faith risks falling into the abyss. The path of Maimonides is the steep, disciplined climb, step by step through logic, study, reflection, and finally, awe. The relationship between reason and revelation for him was like that between light and eyes. Light without eyes is wasted. Eyes without light see nothing. Faith gives direction. Reason gives clarity. Together, they reveal reality. To live without this union is to stumble either in darkness or in blinding glare. Maimonides' God is not the God of miracles that defy logic, but the God of order that sustains logic itself. His universe is rational because its author is rational. Therefore, the pursuit of knowledge is not rebellion against faith, but obedience to it. He also extended this harmony to ethics. A person who believes wisely will act wisely. Just as faith without reason distorts God, reason without faith distorts morality. Rational virtue, in Maimonides' view, is guided by the middle path, moderation between excess and deficiency. The same principle that governs thought governs conduct. Balance. The intellect must guide desire. The will must follow understanding. To believe rationally is to live ethically, because both require self-mastery. In essence, Maimonides sought to sanctify the mind. He saw no holiness in ignorance, no virtue in credulity. His faith was a discipline of thought and character. It demanded clarity, patience, and restraint. To believe in God, one must first purify the imagination. To love God, one must train the intellect. This union of mind and heart, for Maimonides, is the true image of the divine. Not a physical likeness, but a likeness of wisdom. Thus, when he asked his students to believe, he was not asking them to close their eyes. He was asking them to open them fully, to see reality as it is, without the veil of fear or fantasy. In doing so, faith becomes not a refuge from reason, but the crown of it. It is reason fulfilled, made luminous with reverence. For Maimonides, the journey of the human being was neither purely intellectual nor purely devotional. It was the gradual transformation of knowledge into love. He believed that the highest form of faith is not belief born from obedience, but belief born from understanding. The intellect, when purified by reason, leads the soul to a kind of worship that transcends words. In this state, thinking becomes prayer, and knowledge becomes love. This is the spiritual synthesis at the heart of Maimonides' vision, where philosophy and faith no longer oppose each other, but merge into one luminous act of comprehension and reverence. He described this union as the knowledge of God. But this phrase does not mean grasping God's essence, which he held to be beyond all human comprehension. Instead, it means knowing God through his works, through the order, wisdom, and beauty of creation. When a person studies nature, law, or morality with clarity and humility, he comes closer to God than through any blind ritual. The more man contemplates the works of the Creator, wrote Maimonides, the more he will recognize his greatness and the smallness of his own being. This humility is not humiliation, it is the natural awe that arises when the mind recognizes truth. In this view, faith becomes dynamic rather than static. It grows as understanding grows. Each insight into the order of the world deepens reverence for its source. To Maimonides, ignorance was the only real barrier between man and God. Not sin in the moral sense, but the darkness of the intellect, the refusal to see what is. Thus repentance for him was not only turning from wrongdoing, but turning from ignorance. It was an awakening of the intellect to the reality that God's wisdom permeates everything. This synthesis transforms worship itself. For Maimonides, prayer and study are not separate acts. They are two expressions of the same devotion. The ignorant man prays to be heard, the wise man prays to understand. The first asks for things, the second seeks to align his mind with divine reason. When the intellect contemplates truth, it becomes a vessel of the sacred. That is why Maimonides taught that the study of science, mathematics, and ethics can all be forms of worship, when pursued with the intention of knowing the Creator through his creation. But this harmony between faith and reason demands discipline. It requires that the emotions of belief be guided by the clarity of thought. Maimonides saw the danger of uncontrolled devotion, of ecstasy detached from understanding. Religious passion, he warned, can easily slip into fanaticism if not balanced by the intellect. He compared such zeal to fire, useful when contained, destructive when unrestrained. True piety, therefore, is rational piety, the steady flame of conviction, nourished by the oil of understanding. In the 8 chapters, his introduction to Pirkei Avot, Maimonides described the soul as a structure with multiple faculties, reason, desire, and spirit, each requiring harmony. The intellect must govern the passions, just as a ruler governs a city. When faith is guided by reason, the soul becomes ordered, healthy, and at peace. When faith overwhelms reason, chaos returns. The spiritual synthesis, then, is not merely theological, it is psychological. It is the art of maintaining balance between the inner forces that pull man toward impulse and toward wisdom. Through this lens, even ethics becomes an expression of theology. To act ethically is to imitate the divine order. God's perfection is not in his power, but in his wisdom. Thus, the human imitation of God lies in reasoned conduct. For Maimonides, virtues such as patience, moderation, and compassion are not merely moral rules, but reflections of the divine intellect in human life. To live ethically is to live rationally. To live rationally is to live in harmony with the Creator. The unity of faith and reason also reshapes how we understand love of God. Maimonides rejected the idea that love of God is purely emotional. True love, he taught, arises from understanding, from perceiving the depth of wisdom in all things. Just as one who studies a masterpiece grows to admire the artist, one who contemplates the universe grows to love its author. This love is not sentimental, it is intellectual ecstasy, a joy born from clarity. It is the moment when the mind sees enough of the divine order to be overwhelmed by its perfection. For him, that was the summit of human existence. Yet this path is not for the lazy or the complacent. It demands effort, a lifelong cultivation of both intellect and virtue. Maimonides compared the human soul to a lamp that must be tended daily. Reason is the wick, faith is the flame. Without knowledge, faith burns out. Without faith, knowledge grows cold. The synthesis lies in keeping both alive, a task that requires constant renewal. The purpose of wisdom, he wrote, is the doing of good. Thus, the proof of true understanding is not eloquence but action, not theory but transformation. This union between intellect and devotion has profound implications for the modern seeker. It means that spirituality need not reject science, and science need not exclude the sacred. Every rational inquiry, when done with humility, becomes a step toward God. Every moral act, when done with awareness, becomes a form of prayer. Faith and reason are not rival systems, but two languages describing the same reality. One speaks to the heart, the other to the mind, but both, when refined, echo the same truth. Maimonides' synthesis also dismantles the false dichotomy between religious and secular life. For him, all of life is religious if lived wisely. The physician who heals, the judge who rules justly, the thinker who contemplates truth, all participate in divine service. The division between sacred and profane is an illusion created by ignorance. When one understands the order of the universe, everything becomes sacred. To live rationally and ethically is to serve God. This, ultimately, is the heart of believing wisely, to see no contradiction between the light of the intellect and the fire of faith. In this vision, the seeker is no longer torn between two worlds. He walks in one. The more he learns, the more he reveres. The more he reveres, the more he longs to learn. The circle closes not in confusion, but in harmony. Faith refines reason. Reason purifies faith. Together, they build a temple within the soul, a dwelling place for the presence of truth. Thus, Maimonides does not ask us to choose between thinking and believing, but to integrate them until they become indistinguishable. For him, wisdom is not the opposite of holiness. It is its highest expression. The enlightened mind is the truly devout heart. When faith becomes intelligent and reason becomes humble, man attains what Maimonides called devekut, a state of cleaving to God through knowledge and love. In that unity, the soul finds peace, and belief becomes not a commandment, but a joy. To apply Maimonides' wisdom today is to recover the art of living deliberately, to think before believing, to believe before acting, and to act with understanding. His philosophy was not meant to live in books. It was meant to form character. He wanted his readers not only to know what is true, but to become truthful, to embody the balance between faith and intellect in their daily lives. In a world drowning in information yet starving for wisdom, this balance is more necessary than ever. The modern human faces challenges Maimonides could not have imagined: digital overload, ideological polarization, moral confusion, and a deep hunger for meaning. Yet the diseases of the soul remain the same: ignorance, arrogance, and excess. His medicine still works because it treats the root, not the symptom. It begins with the cultivation of the intellect. To believe wisely, one must first learn to think clearly. That means practicing humility before truth, patience in inquiry, and discipline in thought. Maimonides urged his students to question everything, not to destroy faith, but to refine it. Truth does not become more true by virtue of the fact that the entire world agrees with it, he wrote, nor less true even if the whole world disagrees with it. In an age of social media and mass opinion, this is a revolutionary statement. For him, knowledge was not about collecting facts, but ordering the soul. The mind must be trained to distinguish between what is essential and what is accidental, between the eternal and the temporary. In this way, rational understanding becomes a spiritual act, a daily discipline that brings harmony to one's inner world. The person who learns to think properly learns also to live properly, because his actions flow from clarity, not confusion. Maimonides would say that the wise person examines every conviction, every emotion, every habit, asking, does this bring me closer to truth, or does it enslave me to illusion? Another cornerstone of his practical teaching is moderation. The middle path he borrowed from Aristotle, but sanctified with divine purpose. For Maimonides, excess in anything, emotion, wealth, piety, even study, leads to imbalance and suffering. The goal is not renunciation, but alignment. He used the metaphor of medicine. The soul, like the body, becomes ill when it swings to extremes. The cure is gradual correction, moving back toward balance. Thus, the spiritual life is not about rejecting pleasure or intellect, but regulating them with wisdom. The mind, like the heart, must remain steady, neither inflated by pride nor paralyzed by fear. He also emphasized the health of the body as a foundation for the health of the soul. As a physician, he saw no divide between spiritual and physical well-being. To care for the body, eat with moderation, sleep properly, and avoid destructive habits was, in his view, part of serving God. Since the body is the instrument of the soul, he wrote, one cannot understand the Creator while sick or weak. This holistic vision of faith, encompassing mind, body, and action, anticipates modern psychology and wellness philosophy by centuries. It reminds us that reason, when applied with care, leads not to coldness but to vitality. In moral life, Maimonides teaches the practice of conscious intention, kavana. Every act, however small, can become sacred when done with awareness and purpose. Eating becomes gratitude, work becomes service, study becomes devotion. The ordinary is not opposed to the divine, it reveals it. The key is mindfulness rooted in reason, understanding why one does what one does. Blind ritual is empty, thoughtful ritual is transformation. The wise believer does not flee the world, but sanctifies it through understanding. When it comes to belief itself, Maimonides calls for faith purified of superstition. He warns against those who claim to know God's will through visions, miracles, or emotions detached from reason. True revelation, he insists, does not contradict the natural order. Miracles in his reading are not violations of nature, but signs within it, events whose meaning we do not yet comprehend. In modern terms, he invites us to find the miraculous in the rationale, the sacred in the lawful. The universe is wondrous precisely because it is coherent. To live with that awareness is to stand in continual awe. Applied today, Maimonides' path could be described as spiritual realism. It rejects both naive faith and sterile skepticism. It invites us to believe passionately but intelligently, to question boldly but humbly, to love truth more than comfort, and to see study as an act of devotion. The modern seeker who follows this path learns to integrate science and spirituality without conflict. He understands that every new discovery about the cosmos deepens the mystery of its source. Faith becomes not an escape from knowledge, but the courage to face reality without fear. In personal relationships, this wisdom translates into empathy and restraint. Maimonides teaches that anger, pride, and envy are distortions of reason, emotional excesses that cloud judgment. The rational person practices patience not because it is convenient, but because it aligns him with divine order. The goal is not repression but balance, feeling deeply yet acting wisely. In this, he was a psychologist before psychology existed. He understood that emotional peace begins with intellectual clarity. When the mind is rightly ordered, the emotions follow. In society, his philosophy offers a cure for fanaticism and division. Maimonides lived among Christians and Muslims and respected both because he saw truth as universal. He taught that wisdom belongs to no nation and revelation to no single language. Accept the truth from whoever says it, he urged, a principle that could heal much of today's tribalism. To apply his teaching in our time is to listen without prejudice, to learn from difference, and to recognize that all sincere seekers are walking, in their own way, toward the same light. At the personal level, believing wisely means living with intellectual honesty and moral consistency. It means refusing both blind obedience and shallow doubt. It means questioning oneself before questioning others. It means using reason to purify faith, and faith to humanize reason. When one lives this way, life itself becomes philosophy, not as abstract theory, but as daily practice. Maimonides called this imitatio Dei, the imitation of God, not through ritual display, but through wisdom, justice, and compassion. The rational believer becomes a mirror of divine reason in the world. Ultimately, the practical message of Maimonides is one of integration. He does not ask us to choose between science and spirituality, body and soul, logic and love. He asks us to unite them, to make our minds temples of clarity and our hearts instruments of truth. In a culture that thrives on noise and division, this is revolutionary. It means slowing down to think, to study, to listen, not as escape, but as devotion. It means building a faith that can withstand doubt, because it has been tested by reason. When faith and reason finally embrace, they produce wisdom. And wisdom, Maimonides reminds us, is the true form of worship. To live wisely is to live in harmony with the Creator's design. The wise person does not fear truth, for truth is God's language. He does not cling to certainty, for certainty belongs only to the divine. Instead, he walks humbly in the light of understanding, strong in mind, gentle in heart, and faithful in action. That is the legacy of Maimonides, to believe with the head and the heart united, and to live as if thought itself were a prayer.